It's the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Welcome in. I am Chris Harris. This is the Harris Football Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Happy to be here. Glad to have you aboard. This show is a continuation of our preview of the running back position for Fantasy 2015. Part 1 is available now on iTunes, in which we talked about the top 20 running backs for this season. So this show will be about number 21 and beyond. One thing I should mention about that first show is that, well, I recorded it a couple of days in advance. That's what you do when you have a new podcast. You've got to get it listed on iTunes. You got a whole lot of business considerations. So we recorded it a couple of days in advance, and wouldn't you know it, Le'Veon Bell gets his suspension reduced from 3 games to 2 games and invalidates some of what I and Andy Behrens of Yahoo Fantasy talked about in that show on Thursday. Yeah, with Le'Veon Bell only suspended for 2 games, I think I go back to having him as my number 1 overall player and certainly my number 1 running back. So if I could redo my top 20 running back discussion, I would have Le'Veon Bell number 1. I don't think it's a no-brainer, though. I think if you don't want to deal with somebody who's not going to play the first 2 weeks, I understand that, and it would be okay with me if you have Marshawn Lynch or any one of the other guys that I talked about as a potential number 1. But for me, especially in a point-per-reception league, but even in a standard scoring league, yes, sir, now we've got Le'Veon Bell number 1. All right, so there's a little bit of housekeeping. Just in general, I'd like to say that I am thrilled to be doing this podcast on a daily basis, week daily, throughout the 2015 season. If this is the first time you're hearing me talk fantasy, thank you for being here. This is a little bit of a different show for fantasy. I'm very focused on watching film, not so much on the groupthink that looking at statistics tends to engender. You're going to hear me talk a lot about what I see from players. Please, you can follow me on Twitter at Harris Football, Facebook.com/Harris Football. Send me email, heyharris@harrisfootball.com, and tweet to me using the hashtag HeyHarris. If you know me from my previous podcast, you know I will put tons of your feedback on the air, provided it's smart and funny and potentially pretty mean. You're going to notice some inside jokes dropped in the show from time to time.
Can't do it.
Longtime fans are going to recognize things like this. But if you're new, welcome. Again, thank you. I hope you'll keep listening. Let's get to today's show.
Today's kickoff.
As I mentioned, this is part 2 of our running back preview for 2015. So we're going to talk about many running backs who are outside of my top 20. We can't get to every single name, but we'll do our best to get to a bunch of them. And then later in the show, Cousin Josh will be aboard to look at some running back sleepers for this season. I'm going to get us started by talking about the Atlanta Falcons. It's an enviable running back situation. It looks like it'll be a pretty good offense. New head coach Dan Quinn, but more excitingly for fantasy purposes, Kyle Shanahan will be the offensive coordinator. And you know the younger Shanny from his time in Washington, Robert Griffin's first season. There was some very good fantasy weapons in that offense. He even worked a little bit of magic last year with the awful Cleveland Browns. Well, now he's got a stable of weapons in the air that make players like Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Roddy White very interesting. But boy, you would think that a running back will emerge and be a fantasy weapon. The problem is, for our purposes at this point, we don't know exactly who. So in my ranks that you can find on harrisfootball.com, you're going to see rookie Tevin Coleman ranked high. I mean, I have him up at number 23, and the incumbent, well, he's a sophomore in the NFL, Devontae Freeman, I have him at number 36. Why did I arrange them this way? I admit to some degree they're placeholders. I think one of them is going to be top 25 kind of value. At the moment, I've assumed it's Coleman, although you've heard a lot of talk out of Falcons camp that the veteran has the leg up. I don't know. I don't like to believe in anything that coaches say. I'd rather see how it goes on the field, who winds up running with the ones more, especially once the preseason begins in a situation like this. The reason I assumed Coleman for the moment is he's bigger. I talk later in the show with cousin Josh about smaller running backs, and Devontae Freeman figures into that conversation. He's a littler guy, and I have real questions about whether he would hold up to every down use. Now, no Falcons running back is likely to be an every down player unless the other one gets hurt. But Coleman is 6'1", over 200 pounds. He's a little bit more what you think of when you think of a lead running back. Did I love him at the University of Indiana? I mean, the numbers are amazing, no question about it, and he made some huge plays. I think he's a long strider and a sprinter type, maybe not somebody who's going to excel finding a hole, barreling through people. In short, maybe he runs a little bit like a smaller back, even though he is a bigger back. And I won't be shocked if the guy who's more familiar with the NFL rigors winds up being the starter there for week 1, and that would be Devontae Freeman. And if that's the case, I'm likely to flip-flop the Falcons running backs. For the moment, I've got Coleman higher. That's definitely subject to change as August goes along. So if the Falcons look like they've got a potentially really good situation with some maybe questionable guys to fill those roles, the Rams may not have the greatest situation in the world. I think that offensive line looks like a bit of a mess. I'm not sold, as anybody who knows my work knows, on Nick Foles as a starting quarterback in the NFL. But they've got one heck of a candidate to fill a potential role, Todd Gurley, rookie out of Georgia. If he hadn't torn his ACL, might have been a top 5 overall pick. Hey, maybe we would have seen a running back go number 1 overall. Went back and watched a ton of older Todd Gurley tape from his college days, and he's great. I mean, he's the best prospect at running back since Adrian Peterson. And if you're in a dynasty league and you told me you thought Todd Gurley should be the number 1 overall pick in your rookie draft, I could not argue. I think this kid's career eventually is going to be awesome. People do come back from torn ACLs these days. But most of us play in redraft leagues. And you have to wonder, he's not going to be a full year removed from that torn ACL. We can't believe what anybody tells us about how optimistic they are about the player coming back. We just don't know until we see him run, and I have to remain skeptical. I have Melvin Gordon as my top rookie running back this season, but if Gurley was healthy, there's no question he would be ahead of Melvin Gordon. Even with the questions about his knee, I have Gurley at number 27 among running backs, and that's saying something because I tend to be pretty darn gun-shy when it comes to drafting players highly who have serious injuries, who have questions about their availability. It's not going to shock me to see Trey Mason, who had a really nice rookie year himself, wind up being the starter or the timeshare back for a good part of the early half of the season. There is going to come a point in Rams history when Trey Mason becomes an afterthought and Todd Gurley becomes a star. I just worry that it might not happen in 2015. I can talk a little bit about what I think Mason is. I think he falls into that same category of smaller backs, of the Justin Forsetts and the Andre Ellingtons and the Gio Bernards, where there's no question about the ability, and his production was really good for a time in 2014. But my concern is, if he got a full workload, he would wind up getting hurt, and the Rams probably felt the same way because even after a season where Mason looked like he could be the solution at running back and was quick in and out of cuts, couldn't even really play on third downs because he couldn't pass protect yet. He'll learn that part of the game. He still was very productive and really ran circles around everyone else in that Rams backfield. I have Trey Mason at number 33 among running backs, but depending on how this shakes out, if Gurley is worse off than we think, if Gurley isn't productive early and Mason has that job basically to himself, number 33 is probably too low for him, and you could get him with some really interesting value. I would say even teams that don't draft Todd Gurley can take a later round shot on Trey Mason. Okay, so that's Todd Gurley at number 27, which brings me to number 28, and I can't believe I'm going to do this, but at number 28 I have Doug Martin.
Doug Martin will break your heart.
He really will. It's almost a guarantee. At least this year, though, finally the hype is gone because it's been a disaster basically since 2012. We've got 2 straight seasons of total disappointment for Martin. I went back looking for hope. You know, I looked at his film when he was healthy last season on the rare occasion it felt like he was healthy, and I have to say, comparing it to 2012 tape really does not look the same, and you start to have the concern that the string of shoulder and knee and ankle injuries that he's had over the last 2 seasons have started to take the life out of his legs. We know that this happens, and I'm concerned with the muscle hamster that it has happened to him. It shouldn't be a great offense. They've got some interesting aerial weapons in Tampa and a rookie quarterback, and the guess has to be that Martin won't have a lot of rope this season, even if he does stay healthy. Charles Sims looks to me like, maybe a bigger third down back. He's a really good pass catcher, not that much of a do things on his own kind of runner, although, late in the season, I found a couple of runs where Charles Sims, there was one where he just bowled over Luke Kuechly, who's, maybe the best linebacker in the NFL, showing some power that I wasn't sure that Sims had. I guess what this comes down to is I don't mind taking a chance on Martin, and you're going to hear some sort of counterintuitive assessments of Martin that say, hey, why not take the risk? And I guess I'm in that camp. I feel like I can take the risk as long as I'm no longer relying on him to be a fantasy starter. There's no reason to reach for him. As of right now, I believe he's, maybe the number 32 running back in terms of average draft position going at the very end of the 6th round. So that would be a player you're probably not drafting to be a fantasy starter. If you find yourself in a situation where you need a fantasy starter because you've taken other positions and you're picking in the 5th or 6th rounds, don't take Doug Martin. But as sort of a luxury item, I don't mind it. We certainly remember what an explosive player he was. I'm just not convinced that he'll be the explosive player ever again after all these injuries. Let's move on and talk New York Giants, because if I'm going to tell you that the Falcons' backfield looks like a potentially interesting source of value because of the personnel and the offensive scheme, you probably can make the same contention for that Giant offense where Eli Manning in the second season in a Ben McAdoo offense that really saw him start to look like a more consistent, less erratic player in the second half of 2014. We know Odell Beckham's really good. The passing game looks like it'll be deadly again. So is there potential for a running back in New York to be a fantasy star? The issue is that there's 3 of them. They signed Shane Vereen in the offseason. They still have Rashad Jennings and Andre Williams, who will be entering his second season. I have Jennings the highest of this group, but they all have warts, and I'm not going to reach for Rashad Jennings. He's number 32 on my running back list. In terms of pure ability, I think he should be higher. If he found himself on this offense without a lot of viable backups and with a better injury history, Rashad Jennings is a top 20 running back, and there's not too much doubt about it. He can do everything. He's got good long speed. He can catch the ball well. And, for a big guy, he'll make you miss a little bit. He's not a total plotter. But we've yet to really ever see him stay healthy. And there are other guys there. I mean, Andre Williams is someone whose tape I really hated right when the season started last year. He kicked up a fantasy storm by scoring a bunch of touchdowns from the 1-yard line. And he is a big player, but he is the prototypical below-average talent. He's not going to do anything but just barrel into the line. Times when they tried to throw it to him, often it looked like a sumo wrestler trying to play receiver in the NFL. He's not a good athlete, and he's going to be, if anything, he's a touchdown maker in the NFL. I don't think he's more than that. And so for fantasy, I don't love him, but he has the potential to be a very annoying vulture for Rashad Jennings. And then Shane Vereen, in a point per reception league, I think of the Giants running backs, you could convince me that Vereen should be rated the highest. He isn't much of a runner at all, but as you saw in the Super Bowl, when he gets going as a receiver, he's a good player. Now, Giant fans are going to come to learn what Patriot fans learned, which is there's going to be 1 or 2 times a game where Shane Vereen runs a wheel route, and he's wide open because the defense is looking somewhere else, and Eli is going to lay it right in there, and Vereen's going to drop that because that's what Vereen does. But he's not a superstar. Again, he's more of a drain. If Rashad Jennings were to get hurt, unfortunately, I don't think there's a clear handcuff there because now you're probably looking at even more of Vereen on not just third downs and Andre Williams taking some early down work. Basically, this is a mishmash, and it is a good offensive situation. It's one worth monitoring and one worth maybe taking a stab on a later round pick on one of these guys in case it works out in his favor. Put it this way. I mean, I respect the Giant offense to the extent where, yeah, take a chance on one of these guys, as opposed to, there's no reason to draft Denard Robinson. I mean, we don't think that Jaguars offense is going to be any good, so why do I need the contingency case if TJ Yeldon doesn't work out as the starter? A good offense, though, it's not terrible strategy to take the shot on the ancillary guys later rounds, just on the off chance that it works out.
Film Room Surprise.
Often when I'm going to talk about film room surprises, they're going to be favorable. In this case, I want to talk about the Browns backfield, and when you talk about the Browns, let's face it, in general, it's not going to be very favorable. And Isaiah Crowell was sort of an unpleasant surprise when I went back and looked at his tape from 2014. As you know, if you listened to me at all last year, I was kind of a big proponent of Crowell and thought that, at least over Terrence West, he should have been receiving way more carries. And I liked his tape. I was surprised how much I liked it originally, but on a rewatch, I'm not sure I think he's as dynamic as I thought. I mean, he's a banger. He's 225 pounds, and he's definitely not Andre Williams. He's not a bad athlete or super slow, and he has a little bit of wiggle, but he's not that breakaway player that I thought maybe I was seeing in flashes as I was watching as the season went along in 2014. If I was going to come up with an equivalent player for Isaiah Crowell, somebody like Rudy Johnson of the Bengals, remember him? I mean, he was a big touchdown maker for fantasy for a few years there. Someone like Marion Barber, again, he was a good, not great player, kind of a straight ahead, takes a ton of contact, and maybe gets hurt as a result. Good player with volume, but of course in Cleveland you worry they're not committed to any running back, and so I'm not sure that the necessary volume will be there for Crowell. First and foremost, with any Browns running back, with any Browns weapon at all, you're just concerned that the quarterback situation in Cleveland. I mean, when you pine for the days of Brian Hoyer, because now Josh McCown looks like the starting quarterback for the Browns, it's going to be an ugly offense, and so I don't love any of them. You've got Duke Johnson, a pass-catching rookie with some, really good playmaking talent. There's a possibility that he gets involved on third downs. Terrence West is still there. I don't love any of them. I have Crowell highest of the group, but was surprised not to like him more than I wound up liking him. Finally, to wrap up this part of the show, I want to just talk about a few players who are handcuffs right now, but they have the potential to be unequivocally more than that.
Eye roll.
Yes, we are really carrying over all of the traditions, aren't we? So we're going to talk about Ryan Matthews and Amir Abdullah at greater length in a minute. So we're not going to mention them. They're certainly valuable handcuffs. Also, Nile Davis, I mean, I don't know. I've talked with Mike Clay of Pro Football Focus about Nile Davis, and he's not convinced that he's much of a player. But boy, every time I pop in the tape on Nile Davis, I see potential. I know he doesn't have Jamal Charles's quickness. He's not going to cut 3 times on a run and make guys look silly and lose their jockstrap and then run for an 80-yard touchdown. But he is going to run for 80-yard touchdowns. I think someday he is going to be a starter in the NFL. And we've seen him be productive in the NFL, produce big fantasy numbers when Jamal Charles has been out. Now, I don't presume to speak for Mike Clay. He will be able to speak for himself on this show very soon. He's going to be on an upcoming episode. But I think Mike's point is when Nile Davis has been good for the Chiefs, it's been the result of a couple of big plays and some huge workloads that maybe wouldn't recur in his presumptive future starting career. Still, though, he's a very valuable handcuff for Jamal Charles regardless. If you're a Charles owner, you got to make sure you get him. And if I don't get Charles and feel like maybe doing a little poaching, I'm interested. I think Davis has future starter written all over him. A couple of interesting injury-type players. Monte Ball of Denver. He was on everybody's list last year as a potential star because that Broncos offense was so amazing in 2013. Ball started out the year with a couple of very difficult matchups, injured his groin, literally I think played one more snap the entire rest of the year, and now is completely forgotten behind C.J. Anderson. I'm not positive C.J. Anderson keeps that job no matter what. I'm not positive C.J. Anderson is a great player. He had great production last year. He deserves to be a top 15 fantasy running back, no question. But I'm gonna take Monte Ball in some deeper leagues, 13th, 14th round, just in case. And then lastly, another interesting injury guy, Jay Ajayi, who winds up with the Miami Dolphins, falling really far in the NFL draft, presumably because people didn't like what they saw of his knee when they did their medical checks on him. But he says he's been healthy, and I think maybe Todd Gurley is the only collegiate running back whose tape I liked more this year than Ajayi. I think it's crazy that he lasted as long as he did. Lamar Miller is entrenched as the starter in Miami, but has he ever really had starter's touches? Has he ever really been a 20-touch-a-game guy? He's a sprinter. He's slight. He's not really a make-you-miss guy. I think Miller's fine, and I'm not saying don't draft him. But I'm interested in Ajayi. Maybe longer-term NFL teams are right, and he doesn't have a 7 or 8 year NFL career ahead of him, but what running backs in the NFL can count on playing that long? I mean, if you tell me that his knee is good enough for him to play a lot in college and really not have any symptoms, any pain, anything like that, and then you tell me I'm only going to get 2 or 3 years out of him in the NFL, where for the purposes of 2015, that sounds fine to me. I'm not trying to say he's a great fantasy bet this year, but as a sleeper, a definite handcuff to Lamar Miller, and maybe in deeper leagues somebody to steal away from the guy who drafts Lamar Miller, at least he's got my attention.
Today's guest.
So it's time to bring in cousin Josh. And Josh, we are in the second half of our running back position preview, and we're going to talk about a bunch of guys who are not inside my top 20. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm ready to rock. I just came back for some pizza, had a half a burger with my friends, and I'm ready to talk about some running backs.
That's really information that is for life there. Okay, so we're going to start with Justin Forsett, who is number 21 on my list, and he's, as high as way inside people's top 15s. I am frightened of Justin Forsett this year. I can't see him making it through an entire season intact, to be completely honest. He's a 5'8". He's a little guy. He had never done it before last year. I get it. The Ravens look like potentially, throw it to the running back a ton, and he was, let's face it, consistent the entire season. He was awesome. I think he breaks this year. Am I way too low on him?
I think you're a bit low. In fact, I actually drew the one pick in one of my leagues recently where I'm probably going to take Peterson 1, and I'm actually looking probably in my double up on the backswing, 12-teamer in that 24-25 to probably take Forsett. I have him ranked in kind of like that 12 to 15 area. You bring in Trestman, you know he's going to catch the ball. Forte was an animal with him there in Chicago. Do I worry a little bit about the amount of touches he had? Never really done that before in his career. Maybe a bit. What did he touch the ball? Probably around, almost 300 times last year?
He's tiny. He's a little dude.
But I got to tell you, I just don't feel like there's much else there. I don't love the receivers there. I know Steve Smith is good. Torrey Smith's gone. There's not a lot of other running backs there. Who else is going to get the ball there? You're just worried he's going to break down?
Yeah, I think he breaks. It's not like I think week 1 Justin Forsett isn't the guy. I just think age 30, the size of all those players, the Gio Bernards of the world, the Andre Ellingtons of the world who broke down. He happened not to break down. I know he's not a typical 30-year-old in terms of wear and tear, but boy, the one-hit wonder, I think you're asking to get suckered in on the one-hit wonder. But, listen, we're going to see what happens on the field. I can't find anything in Forsett's tape that indicates he wasn't a good player. He was terrific last year, there's no question. So I do think he's got that Ellington, Bernard, scat back, speed, decisive. He was a good runner. He laid down a lot of great tape last year. I'm staying far, far away. But obviously you think at 21 I'm out of my gourd.
Yeah, for me, to me it sounds like more you're not so much worried about the talent. Like, it seems like while he's on the field, you think he'll probably perform as a high-end number 2 or almost a low-end number 1 running back. But you're just worried like week 5, week 6, he goes down and he's not coming back, and your season is kind of derailed if you're picking him in like that late 2nd, early 3rd round.
Don't put words in my mouth. I can't have it. I can't have this. No, I probably don't think even if he's healthy, I bet you he's not a number 1 running back. I'm just going to be lower than everybody. I'm going to own like Lorenzo Taliaferro and Buck Allen in some leagues, in deeper leagues, because I think Forsett doesn't have that job by the end of the year. We'll see how that turns out. we're not going to go through every single name on a list outside the top 20, obviously, but I want your thoughts on TJ Yeldon, because you talk about a kid in college who was a tease and a player who you thought should be good all the time and couldn't always stay on the field. It seemed like there was always a teammate at Alabama who would steal carries from him as the season went along. And now he's really in Jacksonville, and everyone's going to get excited about him. Again, I hate to be the skeptic, but I'm the skeptic.
So I got him right at number 20 on my ranks, kind of sandwiched in that like C.J. Spiller, Joseph Randall, Carlos Hyde group. I'm a little bit skeptical as well. I bought into it a tad preseason last year when we heard all that Toby Gerhardt hype.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, by the time draft came around, I had Toby Gerhardt as one of those do not touches.
Yeah.
And I looked at his career, and it's one of those situations with Yeldon where I'm with you. I watched a ton of him in Alabama. And like you wanted to see those huge breakaway runs, and you just thought this guy could be a monster on that team. And he was good. I mean, it's not that he wasn't great. He was a good player there.
He's a trash bag. He's a trash bag. It's your favorite expression.
I would put him in trash bag central with Carlos Hyde, which we'll get to also. I guess it's more of that situation where I know that Jacksonville's on the rise, but I really try not to draft people.
Yeah.
I mean, from what everyone likes Jacksonville. I mean, people are buying into Allen Robinson. It's Blake Bortles' second year.
Good luck. All
Denard
I can tell
Robinson.
you is good luck. I can't do it, man.
Denard Robinson had those 3 or 4 games last year where people were buying into that, and they thought he was, a high-end player for those weeks playing bad teams. But I guess my problem is when you got that Jacksonville running back and they're playing good teams, to me, it's unusable. Yeah. I mean, those are the weeks where you get TJ Yeldon and they're gonna fall behind 20, 24 points. It's the third quarter. He's not touching the ball.
Yeah. You've mentioned Carlos Hyde in this neighborhood, and the reason I haven't mentioned Hyde in the course of this podcast yet today, this episode, is Hyde's number 16 on my list. I think way more of Carlos Hyde as a film guy, as a player who looks good on tape than you do. I guess you're super down on the Niners. You're kind of a Niner fan yourself.
Yeah. I'm just at a point now where I look at that team. Harbaugh's gone. They've lost multiple linebackers on that defense. The receivers, I mean, there's no Crabtree there. I know you're higher on Kaepernick than me. I just think this is another situation almost like Jacksonville where this team's going to be down in a lot of games. And I kind of liken Carlos Hyde into that situation where like Latavius Murray was in last year where like you're going to get some good games out of Carlos Hyde. Mm-hmm. But it's not going to be versus Seattle. It's not going to be, in my opinion, versus the Rams. Maybe not versus Arizona. And there's 6 games already in your division. I just think the Niners are going to be playing down a lot.
Crutch argument.
Yeah, and I just think it's similar. It's like they're going to be down a lot. He's going to have sporadic outputs where 6 points, 4 points, 20, 5 points, 3 points, 17.
Yeah, in other words, he's a number 2 running back. I feel real comfortable saying he's not a number 1. I mean, he's got ability to be a number 1. I said this in the first part of the running back preview podcasts, and so folks should download that first episode about the top 20 running backs if they want to hear my full take on Hyde. If you lined up all the running backs in the league, he's in the top 12 in terms of talent. He is a really talented kid, and his tape was excellent last year. I grant you, the team isn't good, potentially, might be a 5-win team. I still think he's a good player, and a good player in a non-ideal situation for me, that's a number 2 running back. But hey, we can agree to disagree. So tell me where are some guys that I'm way too low on. I'm Mr. Negative on.
So I looked at your rankings. I got to tell you, and this is one where I've gone back and forth on so much, is LeGarrette Blount.
Ugh.
And I know, and I'll get to you. I know you're the Patriots guy. I know you're probably the better person to ask on this one. But I found myself just coming back to him. And I'll give you my reasoning, and then I'll let you talk. So, you have him 38. I have him he's been moving up slowly from 35 to 32 to 25. I mean, I have him in the mid-20s right now at 25. And I'm just at that point where Stephen Ridley's gone. Shane Vereen is gone. I've seen what Brandon Bolden can do. I've seen what Jonas Gray can do. And I look back at when Belichick has had running backs that he's liked. I mean, 2 years ago, you look at Ridley, and he had that 290-touch season. He's not afraid to give the ball to running backs. But it's there's that other part of me now that's been I've drafted these Patriots guys before. And I bought into the Brandon Lloyd thing, and I thought I was just I did it. I won my league. I took him in like a 4 or 5 double up one year. Worthless. I didn't get fooled by Chad Johnson, but we've all been in that place before where you've taken that Patriot player, not named Rob Gronkowski, and you've just been burnt so bad.
Can you say the TB expression again? What is he? He's a what?
I mean, a trash bag? Is that what you want to
he
say?
is a trash bag. LeGarrette Blount is terrible at football. That's the main flaw in the argument. When anybody wants to defend LeGarrette Blount, he had the 1,000-yard season with Tampa, and he had a couple of nice games, and I got overwhelmed on Twitter at Harris Football from people saying you're way too low on LeGarrette Blount. I watched the tape. He's a giant human who does not run like a giant human. He will never get you 2 yards when you need 2 yards. He's soft. He's a soft, big runner. And it's going to wear thin. He will not be the primary running back for New England. He won't. He's not good.
So you think Stephen Ridley was a way better running back when he was healthy, touching the ball close to 300 times?
Yes, way better. I think Ridley's fine. I think Ridley's a fine player. I think LeGarrette Blount, he's awful. You say you know what Jonas Gray is. I saw him play one game, and he set a record for most yards ever for a person named Jonas in the NFL. They've got a bunch of scat backs who could, Tavares Cadet and James White, and I think there's a great chance that LeGarrette Blount is not. Plus, LeGarrette Blount's going to be, you talked about week 1. He's not playing week 1. He's suspended against the Steelers. Yeah. No, thank you. No, thank you. I disagree so vehemently. You can have LeGarrette Blount. I'm looking deeper, and give me a take on David Cobb. I mentioned him on the first podcast as well. I think a Jeremy Hill clone in a worse situation. Obviously, the Bengals a better offense, a significantly better offensive line, a more stable coaching situation. Less stupid as an organization. But I think Cobb has Jeremy Hill talent. He's maybe doesn't always run as big as he could when he was at the University of Minnesota, but a big, powerful guy. Not fast, not super elusive, but I think he'll run guys over in the NFL. How do you evaluate him versus Bishop Sankey?
Again, that's just one of those situations where I'm not touching. For me, there's about 4 or 5 teams in the NFL. I just will not touch the running backs in those teams. And that's kind of the way that I look at specific players where they're just on that do not draft list, where I just don't like Tennessee at all this year.
Sure.
I get it.
Yeah.
I saw Bishop Sankey last year. He doesn't look like much of a running back. So I think the touches will probably be there for David Cobb in Tennessee. But it's just one of those scenarios where I just don't think. Let's say this. You draft David Cobb. He touches the ball maybe 225 times. Do you think he could put together 1,000 yards? I don't even think he could put together 4 touchdowns. I would almost say a 4.5 touchdowns with you and take the under this year.
Yeah, but if you talk about ability, I'll take David Cobb's ability over LeGarrette Blount. I haven't seen David Cobb play a single down in the NFL. I do have Blount rated a little bit ahead of Cobb, but I think they're in the conversation with one another. And yeah, of course, the Patriots are a better team. We haven't talked Cowboys. Tell me about the Cowboys, man. Why shouldn't Joseph Randle, who's obviously going to be the starter all year? Obviously, I listen to all what general managers say, right? Tell me why Joseph Randle shouldn't be a guy that people are taking a chance on.
I'm not buying into it. I know everyone is just wowed by this Dallas offensive line. I heard some insane stat about DeMarco Murray where his average yards before being touched last year was almost 4 yards or something insane. Mm-hmm. And I get people who want to sit there and say, all right, you take out DeMarco Murray, you stick in Joseph Randle, you probably get 80% of that. But I have no reason to believe that Lance Dunbar is not going to touch the ball. I think he's a decent
if he makes the team. Yeah. He's got to make the team. Darren McFadden.
I just think there's multiple players there. And for me, it's just more about the price tag. Sure. Would I take Joseph Randle if I could get him in the 8th, 9th round? Sure. But this is not a guy with a cheap price tag. You look at ADP, he's the 18th running back off the board. I think he's going in the 4th, maybe early 5th. You're drafting him as your number 2 running back. Every single week you're going to be playing Joseph Randle, a guy who's unproven. To me, you get a few picks later, you could take Jonathan Stewart, who ended the year fantastic. Mm-hmm. I just don't see the allure on Joseph Randle, a guy who hasn't really showed me much just because he's on a team with a ridiculous offensive line.
Sure, that's the allure.
You think this guy can touch the ball 20 times a game and not break down? We've never seen it before.
I don't even know if he's fragile because he's just not played, right? My opinion of Joseph Randle is made a few big plays. I watched the tape, this winter. I watched every single carry he had last year, and he had several long plays that made his stats look sparkling. So people think of him in the same breath as DeMarco Murray. I don't think Murray is a elite, super elite level running back. I just don't. I think he's very good, a very good running back who was in an unbelievable situation. I think Joseph Randle may be a below-average running back. I don't think he has good instincts or vision. He's not a put his foot in the ground and really go kind of player. He has some good long speed. Anybody who's going to take Joseph Randle in the 4th round is essentially letting themselves on fire and just figuring out whether the wind is going to put them out. Because they're either going to hit a home run because Randle, we're wrong and he keeps that job all year, in which case double-digit touchdowns would absolutely be in play. But there's also a really good chance that he's not the guy. In fact, there's a really good chance the guy for the Cowboys isn't on that roster yet. They've talked to Chris Johnson. There are other players. I mean, what if Ray Rice wound up in Dallas? I know he's not in exactly in good stead, but he's certainly a better player than Joseph Randle, Darren McFadden, or anybody else, even probably at this advanced date. So I'm not taking the shot on Joseph Randle, though I think you're overstating the case. I mean, clearly we understand what the appeal is. We don't necessarily think the player's great, and I don't love drafting based on situations, but that situation is the best there is.
Sure. I mean, to me, it's more about the price tag. It's
sure.
That you're taking him in a position where there's going to be good receivers. There's going to be quality running backs that I feel comfortable with, and I'm not just picking a guy because he's on the Dallas Cowboys with that line. I mean, let me ask you a few guys kind of being drafted in that area. You tell me. I know you love Carlos Hyde already, so I'm not even going to go down that area. But 5-6 picks later, Jonathan Stewart, you'd probably rather have him, right?
Oh, I mean, he's 14 on my list.
Sure.
I think people are not realizing what he looked like on tape in December last year. He was, other than maybe Le'Veon Bell, DeMarco Murray was good. Stewart, maybe the 3rd or 4th best running back on tape in December. The issue is, of course, he's always gotten hurt. Probably gets hurt this year, but he's not in this conversation at all for me. He's way above that.
Let me ask you about another guy that I'm kind of curious about. Gio Bernard. About a year ago, I mean, this guy was being drafted before this Jeremy Hill stuff exploded. I mean, this was a guy who was going at the beginning of the 3rd round, some leagues end of 2nd. I mean, what's your feeling on Gio Bernard this year with Jeremy Hill kind of coming off that monster season?
My thoughts are that I really, really hope Hugh Jackson lasts as offensive coordinator because it was a rare case of being able to trust what the coordinator said. I mean, he said he was going to run it until his running backs could run no further, and he did. I mean, Hill's workload was crazy down the stretch last year, and even with 20 touches a game for Hill, Bernard was getting 11 or 12. And that's 11 or 12 for him is enough for him to be at least in the flex conversation. Really good player. I think, my tendency here now in football 2015 is players his size, the 5'9", 198 running back. Boy, in today's NFL, those are not lead backs anymore. Those aren't feature guys. We sort of tried to tuck ourselves into C.J. Spiller, and every time the Bills tried to give Spiller that job, he got hurt. And that's just what happens. I mean, that's what happens because you have a body. I'm not saying Spiller's not tough. It's just when you're that small and take that many shots, that's what happens, and that's why I'm suspicious of Andre Ellington. That's why I'm suspicious of Justin Forsett, and certainly suspicious of Spiller, obviously Mark Ingram being in New Orleans. I feel like, Bernard's upside is probably limited unless Hill were to get hurt. Bernard's not going to be a number 1 running back almost under any circumstances, but double-digit touches per game, I'll take that. And even in a point per reception league, think maybe even a little more of him. He's in my mid-20s.
So he's kind of one of those guys that I've kind of circled because every year I kind of look for that player where, if everything hits right, could I win a league with him? And I look at the situation that Jeremy Hill is in where if something had happened to Hill, do I think Gio Bernard could be that guy who touches the ball 20 times a game, and would he put up monster stats? I mean, you tend to think based on his size, he would still probably only get...
Well, he'd break down. If somebody were to give him 20... it was the Andre Ellington thing. How long last year did I keep saying the Cardinals can't use him this way? The Cardinals cannot use him this way. He will break. And eventually he breaks and needs surgery everywhere. I think there isn't a part of his body he didn't have surgery on. I just worry guys this size, Chris Johnson for a while was an exception. He's about that size. Jamal Charles has been an exception his entire career, but his level of speed and quickness is just different from these other guys. It's why, let's talk about Amir Abdullah. It's why I don't get all that hyped up about Abdullah. How about you?
I mean, everyone is going nuts over this guy.
They really are.
They think he's going to take over that Reggie Bush role. I mean, they think this guy is just going to be – I've heard even people think he's a three-down back where not only is going to catch 50 to 60 balls, but he's going to force Joique Bell onto the bench. Goal line duty's gone. I don't see it either. I still think Joique Bell is going to be there when healthy, getting 15 to 18 touches and all the goal line work. Could Amir Abdullah – could he catch 50 balls? Sure. But so could Shane Vereen on the Giants.
Right.
So can I give you a name that I find myself taking?
Yeah.
Pinpointing on every draft I'm in, and I feel like this is going to be a guy I'm so curious where you stand on him, is Ryan Matthews on the Eagles. And I'll tell you kind of why I'm into him. Mm-hmm. And you give me your thoughts. So DeMarco Murray on that team, I really try to get myself a piece of all these big offenses, whether it's Indianapolis, whether it's Green Bay, Philadelphia. I know that team is going to put up points. So they go out, they get DeMarco Murray. They go out, they get Ryan Matthews. I saw last year, not only did Darren Sproles have a good season, and was he playable, LaShawn McCoy was playable. He wasn't really super RB1, but both of those guys were playable. So I feel like Ryan Matthews, he comes into that situation, he's going to touch the ball probably 8 to 10 times while Murray's there. But we've seen DeMarco Murray go down. Last year, sure, he played fantastic. But he's, in all likelihood, probably going to miss games. I know the Eagles were the healthiest team in the NFL last year, but we've also seen Ryan Matthews touch the ball in seasons 300 times. We've seen him put together 2 seasons for over 1,400 yards not too long ago. I think it was 2 years ago he put together, 8 TDs, compiled 285 touches, caught the ball 25 times. Do you think if everything hits right, DeMarco Murray goes down, do you think Ryan Matthews could be one of those guys that wins you your league and you're drafting him as running back 35, 38, close to 40 at the end of your drafts or in that kind of 11, 12 round?
Yeah, and I have him at 31, so I'm a little higher than most folks, I guess, on him. Could he win your league? If he didn't lead the league in broken collarbones every year, I would totally be into Ryan Matthews. I just feel like, 4 times bitten, now it's time for us to be shy. I agree with you. Murray is coming off, I think, the 6th highest workload in the history of the NFL for a running back.
Way over 400 touches.
Right, and he's been injury-prone every year until last year, and so really great chance that if they try to ride him that hard again, that he breaks down. I just worry that then Matthews would break down. I don't trust Ryan Matthews. It's a soft tissue injury. It's a knee. It's a neck. It's a concussion. I don't think he wins you your league. I think he's the most valuable handcuff in fantasy this year. I think if you take Murray because you don't believe us and you think a repeat is in the offing, you have to reach for Ryan Matthews. Where Ryan Matthews is going in terms of average draft position, every single team that drafts DeMarco Murray should be getting Ryan Matthews. Because if everyone else is thinking of him as RB 35 or whatever, go ahead and reach for him and take him in the 5th round. You got to make sure you have him because those guys put together, granted they might be hurt at the same time, but if they're not, either one of those guys by themselves, healthy, which is asking a lot, does have the ability to change your league. I think we're about out of time, and we've touched on a lot of names. There are a lot more names, obviously, outside the top 20 on my list. You can find my ranks www.harrisfootball.com. And Cousin Josh, you are on Twitter. People should follow you at Detective Fish. Is that correct?
Yeah, Detective Fish. That's Fisch.
And you can get all kinds of witty insights from Cousin Josh. He's a handful. I have to say, you undersold your handfulness. We're going to have you back on, and I expect you to be a little bit more of a handful next time. But anyway, thanks for doing this, man. It was fun. You were great, and America approves.
All right, no problem.
And that's our show. Thank you very much for listening. You can follow me at Harris Football, subscribe on iTunes, and hey, maybe even more importantly, it really helps when you leave a good review on iTunes. Maybe give a good rating. That would be much appreciated. It helps other people find the podcast. And hey, we're all about spreading the love around here, right? So that's it. Thank you for listening. Hope you have a great day.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.